In the silence of a cloister that seems to breathe with the rhythm of an ancient prayer, a walled garden waits like a guarding heart, and under a loggia of clear columns where the light settles like a small host, an angel bows with reverence before a young woman who holds a book in her hands, while an oblique beam of gold descends from on high, as if heaven opened a slit to let pass the word that creates the world. Thus, the Annunciation of Fra Angelico, painter and Dominican friar, whose baptismal name was Guido di Pietro, and whose painting is liturgy and theology at once, not a scene but a mystery made visible, begins to beat. The architecture recalls the cloisters of Florence, with echoes of the new classical order that taught one to measure space with a humble geometry. The perspective leads the gaze toward the figure of Mary, who does not rise as a distant queen, but bows with modesty and resolve in a gesture that is free acceptance, because in this painting the whole story is decided in a yes pronounced in silence. The garden alludes to the Hortus Conclusus, a symbol of her perpetual virginity. The roses without thorns announce a purity prior to any wound. The fine grasses embroidered on the ground are like smaller letters of a vegetal writing where each leaf sings the same secret. The angel carries in his hand white lilies, a sign that the news is not imposed, it is offered, and the young woman responds by crossing her hands over her chest, not out of fear, but out of lucidity, because she knows that all true freedom is born of a loving consent. The light that descends in the form of a dove leaves a golden trail that does not dazzle the face, but lights it from within, as if the flesh learned to speak divine word in a human voice. And on the base of the scene, a tiny inscription sometimes runs, the Ave Gratia Plena, that travels from the messenger's mouth to the chosen one's ear, reminding that in the medieval tradition, the written word can be air, can be rays, can be matter that touches and transforms. Fra Angelico painted several annunciations in his life, the one that presides over the corridor of the convent of San Marco in Florence, and those that glow on panel with a gold ground and architectures of calm marble, like the one kept by the Prado Museum, where the predella narrates episodes from the life of the Virgin from the presentation in the temple to the Dormition, to teach that this scene is not an islet, but the first heartbeat of a vaster tale. The San Marco version includes on the left a silent banishment, Adam and Eve expelled from paradise by an angel with a flaming sword, to say that the new obedience mends the broken thread, and that the entry of the word into time is the medicine for an ancient wound. The column near Mary signals the firmness of that bridge between what was lost and what was recovered. The repetition of the motif on several panels is not routine. It is prayer repeated until the image becomes a habit of the soul. The friar painter understood his craft as a form of quiet preaching. That is why in every detail there is catechesis without noise. The closed door in the background recalls the prophecy of the shut gate that only the Lord crosses. The austere bench speaks of a life of study. The ultramarine blue mantle obtained from precious lapis lazuli is reserved to honor the one who keeps in her womb the highest secret. The halos embossed with tiny punches shine like coins of light upon the heads of those who move in obedience, an obedience that does not crush but elevates. Each gilding is not luxury, it is theology, because the gold leaf does not imitate reality but surpasses it, to say that here mortal time touches eternity. The technique of egg tempera on panel with a preparation of fine gesso and red boli is recognizable in the smooth skin, in the draperies that fall like calm water, in the clarity of the profiles without violence. The workshop practice included an underdrawing, marked with stylus and reviewed with fluidity, and then the embroidery of the surfaces with thin glazes that let the ground breathe, as if the painting were a lamp from within. If one looks closely, one senses pentimenti, small changes of position in the angel or the prie-dieu, because the pictorial truth of Fra Angelico is not mechanical, it is a loving dialogue with the scene. At some moments in its history, the panels were trimmed or moved from their original setting, and the predellas were dispersed among collections, as if the world found it hard to keep together the pieces of joy. There were varnishes that over the centuries yellowed the atmosphere, turning it more earthy, until the careful restorations of the past and present century removed those patinas, returning to the blues their Marian depth and to the pinks their flesh of dawn. Fragile layers were consolidated. Gildings were cleaned with cotton and calibrated solvents. The punching of the nimbi and the work of the estafados were rediscovered, and thus the scene recovered the clear breath with which a friar of the early Renaissance wished to show that beauty serves to pray, and that praying teaches one to look. Some feared that the cleaning would erase the devout aura, but the analysis of pigments and preparatory drawings confirmed that the master's intention was always to put light in the first place, not to exhibit but to clarify. The changes in interpretation have also been a living river. For centuries, the work was read as a symbol of obedience and modesty of the chosen maiden, and so it is. But it is not enough. Conscious character of her response and the spiritual agency of one who listens, understands, asks, and consents is emphasized. The hand on the chest is not soulless submission. It is enkindled intelligence that says, "Let it be done to me, according to your word." The angel who kneels is not superior. He is a servant. He bows before a mystery that surpasses him, because the incarnation is not a conquest from above, but a visit of love that asks permission. The architecture itself speaks without a voice. The columns, repeated in a number that recalls the Trinity, raise a portico of reason and measure, where the divine does not annul the human, it elevates it. The soft modulation of the shadows makes the volumes breathe without theatricality, as if the whole afternoon held its breath to hear a decisive phrase. The discrete symbols complete the visual liturgy. The fence of the garden guards the secret. The open window hints that the world will be reached by that light. And the bed hinted at in some versions recalls that the word will assume every human condition, even weariness. The table with the book is not ornament. It is the work of lectio and meditation. And the letter that shines on the margin of the volume recalls that before being flesh the word was writing, and that upon entering Mary's womb the ancient meaning finds its fulfillment. There were those who sought taboos or scandals in the emphasis on purity, as if the theology of the body were reduced to absence, when in reality the iconography announces fullness, not disdain for matter, but its illumination. The more real controversy had to do with transfers and sales, with devotional fragmentations in times of political change, where complete altarpieces were dismembered in the name of modernity or the market. And even so, the image went on speaking, because its strength does not depend on the frame, but on the dialogue between light and listening. The spiritual reading also changed. During the time of severe reforms, some saw in Mary's inclination a pedagogy of silence that suited the discipline of convents. Today, the courage of that same attitude is also recovered, because to say "let it be done" is not to resign oneself. It is to set out on the way toward a concrete mission of care and risk. In the cells of San Marco, Fra Angelico painted bearer versions of the same scene so that the brothers might meditate as they passed at the hour of prayer. There the floor is almost a carpet of dust. The wall is pure lime, the light a single line that suffices, because the friar knew that excessive ornament distracts when the heart needs concentration. In him beauty was never ostentation. It was a method for the soul to remember the essential. It has been said that his color sings and that his drawing prays, and both things are true. In the Annunciation, the chromatic chant does not shout. It is psalm, a low music that allows one to hear the voice that is not painted, but is heard within the position of the angel, often genuflecting, with wings like fans of dawn, recalls that the message travels by a humble messenger. At the threshold of the cloister, the space between the two is decisive. They do not touch, they speak. That interval of air is pure freedom. Everything is decided there. Our response fits there. The composition arranges silence so that the viewer too may bow within and make himself available to what he loves. Modern studies have observed the exact pulse of perspective. The architectural module, heir to Brunelleschi's harmony, the way the vanishing point aligns with Mary's face as if the meaning of history converged in her listening, and have shown how the preparatory drawing gently corrects the curve of the wing or the fold of the mantle, so that the final line is a natural obedience to the real movement of a body that breathes in prayer. Some pigments reveal the generous economy of the workshop: lapis lazuli blue, reserved for noble veils; azurite for less prominent areas; cinnabar red tempered with lake, so as not to fall into stridency; gold applied, and then punched with star motifs that are not decoration, but memory of heaven, all in the service of a simple and enkindled truth, that the eternal enters time without noise and sustains it from within. Perhaps the ultimate key to this image lies in the way it looks at us without looking at us. Because neither of the two protagonists seeks our eyes, both are turned toward a voice we do not see, and yet by contemplating them we learn to listen. This is the gentle miracle of Fra Angelico. His painting does not impose a feeling, it awakens it. It does not demand an idea, it elicits it. It does not push the will, it disposes it. And upon leaving the room where the panel or the fresco live, one has the impression of having breathed a clearer air, as if an ancient conversation had continued within us without words. That is why no minor controversy, nor any museum move, nor any aged varnish managed to extinguish its vigor. The secret script of the scene is always the same: a messenger who does not command, a woman who understands, a garden that keeps watch, a light that does not wound, and a time that agrees to be saved in silence. And perhaps for that reason, we return to it again and again, because it reminds us that every high story begins in a gesture of listening, that all true freedom needs a humble yes, and that in the interval between a greeting and a response fits the redemption of the entire earth. The painting by Fra Angelico remains a luminous mystery because its power is not exhausted in beauty or doctrine, but in that intermediate vibration where art becomes prayer and matter turns into spirit. His Annunciation not only represents the instant in which the Word becomes flesh, but also proposes a model of the creative act itself. The artist, like Mary, receives an invisible word and transforms it into visible form. In this sense, Fra Angelico does not paint to adorn faith, but to reveal its secret architecture. Every line of the column, every shadow on the ground, every golden thread in the folds of the mantle participates in a theology of order. The harmony between the proportions, the light, and the attitude of the figures is not accidental but the result of spiritual calculation. It is as if the friar wished to say that the entire universe is contained in the obedience of a loving geometry. His method of work was almost liturgical. Before painting, he prayed, and before mixing the pigments, he recited the hours of the divine office. The testimonies of his contemporaries assure that he wept with emotion while he worked, and that his silence was that of a monk absorbed in mystery. That attitude can be perceived in the delicacy of his stroke. There is no violence, no anxiety. Everything seems to be breathed by a different time, the time of the spirit. That is why his figures do not belong to the world of heavy bodies, but to that of embodied souls. In them the air is substance, and light is prayer. The Annunciation that today is kept in the Prado Museum, coming from the convent of San Domenico in Fiesole, still preserves that atmosphere of an intimate temple. It was made around 1430, when the artist was prior of the community, and it was intended for the high altar. The lower predella, with scenes from the life of the Virgin, narrated the before and after of the great event, the birth, the presentation, the meeting with Elizabeth, the adoration of the Magi, the Dormition, and the Assumption. Thus, the complete story was understood as a single continuous heartbeat, from the announcement to the glorification. The restoration undertaken in the 20th century made it possible to discover the traces of the preparatory drawing in charcoal, the corrections made over the gold leaf, and the original intensity of the pigments, which for centuries had remained muted by the smoke of lamps and layers of varnish. The most surprising finding was the recovery of hidden lights. Those minimal gleams in the halos, the golden reflections on the angel's wings, the transparencies of Mary's veil. When the varnishes were cleaned, it was understood that the work had been conceived as a symphony of graded brightnesses, a golden scale that goes from the absolute brilliance of heaven to the earthly gentleness of the human face. The cleaning did not destroy the mystery, it revealed it. Many spectators, on seeing it after the restoration, said that it seemed freshly painted, and others, more sensitive to the passage of time, recognized in it the miracle of permanence, the faith of a man transformed into color, still breathing after 6 centuries. But beyond the technique, the strength of this painting lies in its symbolic language. Fra Angelico does not invent, he interprets. The walled garden represents the soul in a state of grace, the open architecture, the church that welcomes the mystery. The golden beam, the divine word that descends like a seed of light, the dove, the Holy Spirit that fertilizes without wounding, and the column between both figures, the invisible axis that unites heaven and earth. The entire painting is structured according to a balance of opposites, interior and exterior, shadow and clarity, word and silence. And at the point where both worlds touch, Mary's hand crosses the air like a bridge. For centuries it has been debated whether the face of the Virgin is a portrait or an ideal. Some believe they recognize in her features those of a nun from the convent of Santa Caterina. Others think it is pure invention. What is certain is that the serenity of her gaze does not belong to the flesh but to the spirit. Her beauty is not sensual nor decorative. It is moral. It is the harmony born of the understanding of her role in the universe. Mary is not surprised nor frightened. She is in contemplation. Her gesture teaches that true heroism is to accept that which exceeds us. The angel, for his part, has a delicacy that borders on the impossible. His wings, woven with iridescent colors, seem to materialize music. His face is androgynous, a mixture of innocence and power. There is no hierarchical distance between him and the Virgin. Both share the same light, the same recollection. It is a dialogue of souls. Even the shadows on the ground seem to take part in that silent conversation. On the marble tiles, the light settles with obedience, as if matter too were listening. In Fra Angelico's thought, art should serve truth without losing its sweetness. His painting does not impose dogma. It persuades. That is why his Annunciation was for centuries an example of balanced spirituality, a faith that reasons and a reason that kneels. But as time went by, interpretations widened. In the 19th century, when religious art was rediscovered by the Romantics, the work was seen as a symbol of ideal purity and of nostalgia for an innocent world. Later, the art historians of the 20th century read in it a prefiguration of Renaissance humanism, the encounter of the divine with the human expressed with naturalness, without theatricality or fear. And today, contemporary studies find in its serenity an ethical lesson, spirituality as a form of inner balance, contemplation as an act of resistance against the haste of the modern world. There has been no lack of more hidden theories that see in the geometry of the composition a coded language, a correspondence with Pythagorean proportions, or with the secret architecture of Dominican temples. It has even been suggested that the 7 columns of the portico represent the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and that the beam of light divided into 3 bands symbolizes the Trinity. But beyond those readings, what endures is the visual experience of harmony. Each element responds to an invisible order that transcends the religious anecdote. The scene takes place in a place that is not entirely earthly nor entirely heavenly, but in that intermediate point where reality opens to the eternal. The supposed taboo that some modern critics have wanted to discover in the iconography, the absence of visible emotion, the extreme restraint of gestures, is not repression, it is liturgy. In medieval and early Renaissance painting, feeling is not represented in the face, but in the light. Inner intensity is expressed in outer order. That is why Mary does not weep, does not smile, does not tremble, she shines. Her serenity is the highest form of passion, a passion oriented toward the infinite. When the work is contemplated today in the museum, surrounded by visitors, a singular phenomenon occurs. The noise of the room is silenced in the viewer's mind. The gaze stops at the sweetness of the Virgin's face, at the humility of the angel, at the mathematical precision of the columns, and without realizing it, one breathes more slowly. It is as if the painting continued to fulfill its original function, to invite to prayer through beauty, and then one understands why Fra Angelico was called the painter of angels, not because he painted them, but because he painted like them, with a purity that excludes neither intelligence nor wonder. The Annunciation is not only the story of the birth of Christ, it is also the birth of modern art, understood as a form of knowledge. In the dialogue between the messenger and the woman, the essence of the creative act is summed up: to listen, to understand, and to transform. The light that enters through the window of the painting continues entering the history of art, reminding us that all true creation begins in silence. There, where the soul inclines itself before what surpasses it, there beauty is born. And so, 6 centuries later, the fresco and the panels of Fra Angelico continue to speak with a voice that does not age. They speak of the power of contemplation, of the dignity of the human, of humility as a creative force. They speak of a God who does not burst in with thunder, but with gentle words, and of an art that does not seek to impress, but to elevate. They speak of the promise that still sustains us, that in the midst of noise and shadow, light always finds a face willing to say yes.